Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Ag Forecast brought to you by Agrible, the makers of Morning Farm Report. Our software gives growers the insights to make the best decisions possible about their operations. Well, I want to start off with an animation here of what the winds look like around midday on Wednesday. So this is just the middle of this week, and what we can see is we have a little clipper system that's kind of come right through parts of Wisconsin, was moving off toward the northeast very, very quickly. And as it was moving, look at the strength of these winds on the backside of this, and then of course the winds out ahead of it bringing in some moisture that did provide for some snow in this area. And, these winds have been incredible. We've seen winds in this area that at times were over 40 miles an hour, and a lot of folks the last few days have been really dealing with these high winds. And so if we kind of think about all of this in the context of what these systems mean, I want to first start off with snowfall. So the last 72 hours, we've really seen the effects of the lake effect snow really taking off here across the Great Lakes. But honestly, because of the presence of that huge ridge, a big section of the country has been void of precipitation and, of course, void of snow. If we look at the season totals so far on snowfall, something to kind of point out here. Our heaviest snows have really been confined where we've had at least over a foot of snow so far this year into the very far northerly latitudes and, of course, downstream of the Great Lakes and also, of course, in the mountains. But what's interesting is that there's a huge section of the country where we are behind average kind of on snowfall. In fact, I'm making this video right now in South Dakota and Sioux Falls, and there's no snow on the ground except for some piles for some snow a while ago that are still trying to melt in some of the parking lots. So this is this is certainly an interesting thing to be taking note of. But I want to come back to that wind issue before we kind of get into a longer-term snowfall forecast and even talk about the probability of a white Christmas at this point. So let's talk about winds. Got a great question from Jeremy Wolf, was asking about how winds this year have been compared to average. So here we go. I'm going to make a series of maps month by month that compare the surface winds to normal. So anytime you see red on any of these maps, we're windier than average, and anytime you see blue would be less windy than average. So what's interesting is we started off the season the month of May. Look at this. We had a big section of the eastern Corn Belt experiencing windier than average conditions, and those carried over into June. And what's interesting about this is our prime time of year where we're applying a lot of herbicides, and we clearly had higher than average wind speeds this past June, which may have been a major cause for some of the drift issues that we saw. When you see the really bright reds down here, these are from the tropical systems that came through the Gulf of Mexico in June. So Cindy was a big reason why we see such high wind speed values here. Into the month of July, big ridge took over, and as a consequence, underneath that ridge, we saw some, more calm conditions. But as we move into August, look at this. This is the impact of Harvey. Look at the high wind speeds measured down here. But overall, across much of the Corn Belt, August, even though at times was very windy, when averaged over the entire month, was not a windy month for much of the Corn Belt. Same kind of holds through for September, but October, look at October as we transitioned into our fall time period. Really a rather windy month for a lot of folks here across the Corn Belt. Certainly we can see the impacts of Nate and Philippe that came through parts of the Gulf of Mexico. Beginning into November, we see that a lot of things did calm down when you look at the month as a whole for the Corn Belt, but we did have a few days in there where the winds were really screaming. But when you average those out with some calmer days, you end up seeing a slight a calm bias in the overall winds. So there you go. That's what the months look like. And I think the most interesting thing about it was how windy June was. That was a major issue with this year. Okay, well, let's take a look at the current winds in the jet stream right now. I'm going to tell you something. As long as we have this huge ridge out west, we will not break down that flow pattern that's conducive to Santa Ana winds and keeping those fires going. And also, as long as the flow over the eastern half of the country stays in this broader trough, we will continue to see the lake effect snow going. We'll also continue to see these little clipper systems coming around the backside of this trough, bringing some snow to some folks, and other folks are not getting any precipitation at all. We're going to look at both things in a moment. Now, here's the overall flow through the next 16 days. So again, we're looking at troughs and ridges. This is forecast by the GFS model run in ensemble mode. So first thing I see here is that once we get into Thursday, the first thing we're going to be watching is there's a bit of a trough that's coming through the flow of the atmosphere. It's going to go through parts of the northern plains and kind of sweep on toward the south. And this might generate some precipitation here in the Great Plains. We'll take a look at that in just a few seconds. But overall, what we see is the reinforcement over the northeast of that huge trough, and that's going to keep the lake effect snow machine running here. Now, what's interesting is that by the time we get into Saturday and into Sunday, we are watching for this trough to develop and kind of lift air out ahead of of it bringing some precipitation, but that'll mostly be confined to the southern states. We'll take a look at that in just a few moments. But as we just kind of continue to animate this forward, what we really start to see is the establishment, or I guess I should say the continuation of this deeper trough and broader ridge over the west. And about the only chances we'll get for precipitation across the Corn Belt will come from some clipper systems that go riding around this, at least over the next week or so. And that's kind of the bigger picture of the flow of the atmosphere in the near term. Now, if we just take a look at what's going on over the next 3.5 days, so getting through Sunday, here's an animation of what the radar might look like. If we kind of step back here and talk about what we expect to see by the time we get into early morning on Thursday, like I said, there's that little shortwave trough coming in right through here, and you're going to see that that's going to bring the chance for some snow into parts of the Dakotas, right into this area, some lighter snow. By the time it gets further south in Nebraska and Kansas throughout the day, it may warm it up enough that this is going to be falling as this precipitation will be rain. But as we move forward, we're going to be watching for this system right in through here. Here we go. By the time we get into late Saturday into Sunday, we're going to be seeing that trough kind of swing out here in the west and kind of helping to lift air out ahead of it, which will produce this precipitation event along the southeast. And as I animated that, you probably saw that the Great Lakes are going to be seeing a good chance for some lake effect snow most days. Now, if we just kind of animate this out in 6-hour time chunks through the next 10 days, let's kind of take a look at this real quick. Look, Friday looks to be a pretty calm day. This will be after the snow kind of moves through this part of the country on Thursday. So the next thing that we're really watching out for is that trough to dig over here and bring up this precipitation here through Texas and the lower Mississippi River Valley before it spreads to the east. Now, because of the position of that trough, we could push some of that precipitation all the way up into the eastern Corn Belt here. But really, I think we just got to be watching these little clippers that keep rounding the base of this trough. Here comes our next one. This will be next Thursday coming through. Now, I want to let you know something. The models are getting kind of a little excited here, getting out pretty far into the forecast. So there's a lot of uncertainty here. But we're looking at this time period 2 to 3 days before Christmas, seeing the development of a low pressure system that might bring quite a bit of precipitation to the eastern third of the country. A lot of uncertainty with this right now. So don't look at this map and assume this is what's going to happen. But the model's been keying in on that pattern as of late. Now, if we just look at the total accumulated precipitation to our next 10 days, that's what you just saw animating here. The thing I want to point out is most of the precip across the Corn Belt here is going to be from these clipper systems. We're getting some lake effect snow over here, but we have to talk about how we might be getting some heavier snows here in the Appalachians. Again, this is Sunday through Tuesday's rainfall that you see coming in down here, but a big section in the middle of the country, which has been very dry, is expected to stay dry moving forward. Now, what I want to show you is this. This is an animation I produced that just gives you total accumulated snowfall. And please, please, please listen closely. When you look at these maps, we're not going to use them to help us estimate exactly how much snow is going to fall, but instead we're going to look at them to see where the snowfall patterns will be. So first thing we see here is that over the next 10 days, we are expecting to see quite a bit of lake effect snow. So this is all snow on the downstream side of the Great Lakes. Also, we have a couple of clipper systems that kind of come racing through in this direction, which is why we see, anywhere between 2 and 4 inches of snow coming to parts of the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin. So that's what this is primarily coming from. This snow that you just see kind of pushing in right through parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, getting over into the mountains here in Virginia and West Virginia. A lot of that's coming in late in the time period associated with that low pressure system that I said we have a lot of uncertainty about its formation. So let me watch it. Let me keep a close eye out on that. But if it does come in as currently forecast, and if there's enough cold air still sitting in the base of that trough, we could be seeing some decent snows as we lead into the few days before Christmas. So I'll watch it closely, give you multiple updates before we get into that time period. Now, just to show you the 10-day output from the European model is showing a very similar pattern in terms of snowfall. Clearly see the lake effect snow going here. We got the lighter snowfall amounts with those clipper systems coming through, again, parts of the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. So very similar picture between our two global models here. And just for the fun of it, we are now able to look out all the way to December 25th with some of our longer range models. And what you're seeing here is this is the probability of having at least 1 inch of snow on the ground at that time. And so what's interesting about this is clearly the northern tier of the U.S. and getting over to the Northeast, high probability of having a white Christmas. But you can really see that a midsection of the country here, basically due to the presence of a broader ridge at times, the probabilities are rather low. And normally in the Dakotas, there's pretty high probability of having a white Christmas. But this year, because of that presence of that trough, that ridge, we may miss out on on having a higher chance. We'll keep an eye on this as we move forward. Okay, let's transition as we finish this video to South America. Just make sure we know what's going on there. You're looking at the last 30 days and expresses a percent of normal precipitation. I've zoomed in here on Brazil's major growing regions and also Argentina. Now, we've been discussing quite frequently about the setup here that's brought in plenty of precipitation recently into Brazil's main growing regions, which would be these northern growing regions here. The southern growing regions have been doing okay, so we get down here into Paraná, Rio Grande do Sul. It's been okay, but really getting over to parts of Argentina, Uruguay, and parts of Paraguay, we have actually been quite dry over the last 30 days. We've been talking about that in each one of our updates. As we kind of just play here for you the next 10 days of accumulated precipitation, we have a couple of things kind of happening that I think are going to be favorable overall. We're still seeing the precipitation coming in through this section of Brazil, its major growing regions. This is we'll be getting a little bit drier than average as we move into the second week here, but overall we've been very wet in this region recently, so this is not going to be a major problem. But if you get down here, remember Uruguay into Paraguay and also parts of Argentina have been very dry. Well, the models are trying to bring in, once we get past this week and into midweek next week, more precipitation for those areas. And so that would favor an area that's been under quite a bit of stress recently. And but I'll tell you this, with all the rain that's come through here as we finished up our soybean planting, we're getting into the middle part of this season. This precipitation has been very timely coming in, removing some of the anxiety and some of the problems we were anticipating with drier conditions. And I'm sure that's going to be a positive thing for soybean yields coming out of South America. But we'll still have to watch for what happens in January, February, and March, and keep a close eye on what we're anticipating there in terms of the potential for dryness, both in Brazil's major growing regions and also the continuation of some drier weather, possibly in Argentina. So at this point, there is quite a bit of uncertainty in those longer range forecasts, and we'll just keep you updated with every new set of data that we get so we can keep a good perspective on it. With that, I think I'll wrap up our video. We hope you look forward to Agrible's next ag forecast coming out on Monday. To get Morning Farm Report for your operations, complete with a daily email that shows you a snapshot of your field conditions each morning, go to morningfarmreport.com. Sign up for that free account. Full grower accounts are free if you sign up for a sustainable yield program or for growers work with 80 merchandisers. Look forward to talking again after the weekend.